Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 5 Myths About Confined Space webinar. I'm Amanda Siliker. I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager here at Construction Safety Nova Scotia, and we're so happy to have you all join us today. So a little bit about Construction Safety Nova Scotia. We're an industry-funded, not-for-profit association focused on improving occupational health and safety in the construction sector. All companies with current WCB account under the construction industry classification codes of 4011 to 4499 and 3551 are automatically members due to the levies they pay to the WCB. So if you haven't heard about Construction Safety Nova Scotia yet, I highly encourage you to check out our website. We do a lot of training every year. Tons of students get trained with us. We also administer the core certification for the province. And we have a great mentorship program. We have highly trained OHS advisors on staff who are here and ready to help you out for free with your safety programs. So here today, we have one of our OHS advisors, Paula Shemley. She is one of our instructors for our Confined Space course, and she has extensive experience in the mining industry, having worked for companies such as Barrick Gold and Procon Mining. She's trained in surface and underground safety, mine rescue, and industrial hygiene. She teaches some of our compliance courses, incident and investigation protocol, and basic and intermediate first aid here at Construction Safety Nova Scotia. She currently holds her Construction Safety Officer and Construction Safety Supervisor designations. She has her Gold Seal certification, and she's working towards her CRSP. So quite a few qualifications there, that's for sure. So just to give you a bit of an outline of how the next 40-ish minutes are going to go, we're going to talk to Paula about what is a confined space. She's also going to discuss some of the confined space hazards with us, routes of entry as well. And then we're going to have the 5 myths of confined space debunked. Also, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So no matter what social platform you're watching us on, you can comment or type in any questions that you might have. And then here I'll see those on the back end system, and I'll be able to ask those questions to Paula at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Paula to kick us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Amanda. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about a confined space. So first, let's figure out what one is. So a confined space is an enclosed or partially enclosed space that is not designed or intended for regular human occupancy, with restricted access or exit, and that is or may become hazardous to a person entering it because of the design, the construction, the location, atmosphere, materials or substances, or in any other conditions that's involved in it. Next slide, please. So first of all, we kind of look at what is a confined space. So when we look at a picture like this is one of the questions that's in my classes that I ask. Would you define this as a confined space? And most at this point would come back when they're looking at the different defining definitions of it. Yes, absolutely it would be. So you've got a water source in there. So there's a potential for drowning or anything of that kind of nature. Don't see any type of a ladder or anything else to get out of it in this case on it. Let's have a look at the next slide. So something like this, a submarine, okay, or a mine, we'll give you that one too. The question is, would that be considered a confined space? Well, not necessarily, but what's in it is. So every part of the place is in there. So you've got compartments that are considered confined spaces, areas that are considered confined spaces. So therefore the training would be neat. But an actual submarine is meant for human occupancy. But again, like I said, some of the spaces that go even further into it. So, I mean, a space could be considered all kinds. So it can be above or below ground. It can be found in almost any work site. It goes not necessarily by the names, but it could be something like a silo. It could be a vat, a hopper, a vault, tanks, water vessels, manholes, pump stations, access shafts, trucks or rail cars. There's another one. Aircraft wings, boilers. So different portions of the jobs would entail some confined spaces that would need to be identified in all of our workplaces going forward. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the hazards that exist within these confined spaces, because there's a lot of them. So atmospheric hazards. So we have oxygen deficient or enriched environments. Okay, so that's a problem in itself altogether there. Is it toxic? Is it something like H2S? Is it methane? Is it flammable? Is it inadequate testing involved? Improper ventilation? Do we need to add in some mechanical ventilation here? Are we testing in the proper places? So when we do the testing on a confined space, it's not only supposed to be done inside, we need to start on the outside of the areas to figure out if there's anything around it. We've got some physical factors to consider. We've got body size, prior injury, physical capabilities. Let's talk about that for a second. So one of my coworkers that I work with, she was working with an individual that was a little bit larger. So as the condition, he went into the confined space, the body started to swell. So now we can't get this person out. So we need to consider that. So what we ended up having to do with that person is you kind of need to talk them down, go through a little bit of the first aid procedures. You do that. Prior injury. Do they have neck, back, aches, anything else like that that's going to cause a problem? What happens now if they have to climb a ladder to get out, or they need to be taken out with harness? Physical capabilities. Are they physically capable? Okay, so we don't sometimes know that until we put them through some of the testing, and that's why it's so important to get some education and some training, and we can identify some of these things before we actually put an individual into a confined space. Temperature factors. Nova Scotia has incredible temperature waves that can go from 40 plus to down minus 30. So we need to think of things like hypothermia, heat stress, exhaustion. So if you're working, for example, in a ship in a confined space underwater, it's going to be a lot cooler than it would be above surface. Now let's reverse that around. You're working in one of the compartments, high end in one of those places where you're getting the reflection from the sun. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter in there. Are you okay in that situation? Do you have what's needed? The extra clothing, the water, whatever's needed. Your psychological factors, claustrophobia and the focus. Some people don't know they have claustrophobia until they're put into a position like this. We used to test our employees every once in a while with hazmat suits. We put a hazmat suit on them and you'd find out very, very quickly if someone is claustrophobic or not. And are they able to focus on the job, or are they constantly concerned about what's going on around them? Because focus is a huge thing for any hazard. We have other physical hazards such as dust, noise, structures, drowning, or entrapment. Now, dust isn't just an irritant in the respiratory system. Dust is also explosive. So we need to consider those factors when we're looking at a confined space. Noise, how loud is it in there? Your attendant at the end of your confined space needs to be able to communicate with you at all times via either voice or a radio. Are they able to do that, or is it too noisy in there to do that? The structures. Are you having to maneuver your body in and around stuff? Is that going to be a difficult situation? What happens if you become unconscious? Are we going to be able to pull you out of there? Drowning and entrapment, exactly what it sounds like. Is there a water source? Is there a concern? Is there any way that you can drown? Entrapment can also be of material. Okay, it's not just water. So are you in a silo? Things like that, a manure vat. Health factors, things like cancer, E. coli, hepatitis, HIV. They're all factors. What are you cleaning? What are you doing right now? You make sure that you've got the proper PPE on that's involved there that you're needing to have. And if you're concerned, ask some questions. Make sure. One of the biggest things about going into a confined space is knowing your hazards ahead of time so that you're able to address them, so that going in, that you're not having to think about, oh, what do I do then? This should have already been planned. Next slide. So we have a couple different routes of entry here. So it's how the hazardous substance is entering in the body. So there's 4 main routes of entry. So inhalation into your respiratory tract, you're breathing it in. Okay, absorption. Is it coming through your skin? Is it through your eyes? Making sure you're wearing your proper PPE. Ingestion, let's talk about that one a little bit. So you got your digestive tract, but you've also got to remember that if you don't practice like good hygiene protocols, like washing your hands, things like that, and you were working in that situation and now you pick up your sandwich and go to eat it, now you're eating that, or smoking a cigarette, you're putting that to your face and you're basically ingesting it. So that's another way. And then you have injection, which is basically going through your bloodstream, or you getting pricked by a needle, a piece of sharp object, could be glass, could be metal, could be anything. So we want to make sure that we're aware of what's going on in the hazards there. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So let's talk now a little bit about the myths. So the first myth is call a confined space something other than confined and you'll avoid plenty hassle. Well, a lot of organizations are going to try and do that, but difficulties will arise with this. So what people keep trying to do is making it easier, and sometimes I think it makes it more difficult. So yes, a confined space management plan can be complex. All right, it's something that we need to do. It's expensive, depending on the nature of the hazards involved, but it's important that we do that. So we first identify. We need to identify all the hazards that are around. And if you're not aware or of how to identify them or what you're concerned, is it really a confined space, then talk to someone. Talk to someone that knows. Talk to your Department of Labor. Reach out to the different organizations in your province, because each province is going to have their own criteria. So they may try and avoid some of the difficulties when doing it, but alternatively, they need to make sure that you do have a confined space plan that's in order, and you are defining a confined space as to what it is. Okay, and the next slide, please. This too. Once you're aligned with Z106, you're good to go. Well, yes and no. You still need to comply with everything that's on there. It's not the end all and be all, though. That's the thing. Regulation specific to each province is going to trump this standard. So this would be a good baseline, and then we're going to want to go better to wherever the provinces are that we're going to look at. So the changes that were made to this edition were basically the improvement of the flow, readability of the document. Secondly, was to add some informative annexes to it. Harmonize the standards of the old CSA 1000 and 1001 and 1002, and then elaborate the information regarding it. So the standard's going to provide you with an overview of the steps an organization needs to establish to maintain an effective confined space management program. The safety information for workers entering the confined spaces and for personnel responsible for ensuring the safety of the workers. Requirements for the confined space, emergency, and the rescue. The standard is consistent with Z1000 in that it's intended to help the users integrate the confined space management program into the organization. But like that one, it's just basically a clause to build on it going forward. So clause 4 specifies general requirements for it. 5 to 8, the planning and the implementing the confined space management program in itself. 9 and 10 is specific requirements related to the incident investigation and the analysis, regards again to confined spaces. So it's designed to be used related to the occupation and the technical standards. So it's intended to be referenced with other standards. So no, you're not good to go just entirely with this one. So at the time of the publication, the confined space legislation differs again from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in Canada. The applications for the requirement are establishing and maintaining a confined space management program. The roles and responsibility of the management, the entry team, and the emergency response team. Identification and designation of confined spaces. Designation and engineering of confined spaces. hazard identification, risk assessment relating to the work in confined spaces, management and control hazards and risks associated with them. Your PPE, what's required and other equipment for use in a confined space. Your general safety procedures for confined spaces, trainings, determining work capability and performing the assigned duties, because that needs to be established as well. Emergency plans for rescuing the workers, management of external systems providers, and of course, documentation to back up everything that you've got in place. So, yeah, it's a good baseline, absolutely, but it's something that we need to build on going forward. Next slide. The red tape nightmare, of course. The myth applies particularly to organizations operating with more than one province or territory. While it's true that each jurisdiction has its own regulation, it doesn't necessarily spell a management mess. What they're basically saying is that anybody that's got a confined space management program, it's a good one to start with because the bases are all the same. You just need to build it towards the provincial jurisdictions that you're living in. Okay. They can't write the regulation in isolation without consulting the people. So when they're saying that is they're basically saying, so in Ontario, for example, you've got other regulations to apply to as well, like your chemical industries, things like that. So getting them all on the same page becomes very difficult. New Brunswick has a different protocol for where the attendant needs to be. There needs to be 3 people versus just 2. So again, it's just making sure that you're fine lining it, making sure that your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted. Yeah, I guess that's kind of it is that as long as you see one of them, it's an effective plan, just take that plan, take your regulations in your areas and merge it together to create that plan. And if you're concerned that it's not meeting or it's not explaining something, please don't hesitate to call or call the Department of Labor and ask them directly as well, because they're a great source. Next slide. All you need is a confined space management plan. Planning for working in confined space is important, but according to most things, practice makes perfect. So the only way that you're going to make this plan perfect is by practicing it over and over. We often make sure we've got everything that looks great on paper, but then we forget about actually doing the follow through and performing it and practicing and finding our deficiencies. And then we can fix them each time. So we get better and better and better. Because the option is potentially a life loss, and that's where we can't be. So this is something that we need to do. So drills are crucial no matter what. We need to make sure that we're monitoring the program. The program should be monitored once a year. Okay. Are those confined spaces the same as they were a year ago? Have we added more to them? This is part of the situation where you look at it. Every year we need to go further and further in it. Do each position know what they do? So it's great, again, to have it on paper, but does the attendant know what they're supposed to do? Does that monitor know that they're not allowed to leave their area? Does that monitor know they're not allowed to go in and rescue anybody? Do they know that they need to have that telephone right there? So items like that, when we practice it, the system is there, we go through it, it becomes muscle memory, and we just do it. Yeah, that's kind of the management plan. Have it, but make sure that it works. So test your systems over and over again. Next slide. Myth 5, 911 emergency services double down on site rescue. Unfortunately, that is a mistake that we should not all make. 911 should absolutely be part of the emergency plan, but each site needs to have their own plan developed. You've got your own set of criteria, your own hazards. 911, you're going to call them, you're going to get the fire department. Sure. Have they been working at confined spaces? Have they been working at heights? Are they prepared, or have they only been trained on self-rescue? We need to make sure that our site is taken care of. Plus, where did they dispatch from? Again, if you're waiting an hour for them to arrive with you, what happens, unfortunately, is the human factor where people get impatient. It's like, well, that's my friend. I got to go get him. I got to go get him. They go into the confined space, and now you're dealing with multiple victims when there should have only been one. So you need to know, do you have a picker truck? Do you have a GLG? Do you have ladders? Do you have a David arm? Do you have a tripod? Do you have a classy harness? Do you have all the stuff that you need to make the retrieval of the potential person happen? And again, practice the system over and over again to make sure that it works. Because again, it may work in one location, it may not work in another location. But companies need to develop an on-site rescue system that can be ready and immediate action for rescue from a confined space. That responsibility belongs to the organization, not to the ambulance. So yes, we do need to have something else in place. 911 is not the answer. It can be on the plan, but not the plan. Next slide. All right.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paula. That was an excellent overview. Before we get into the Q&A, I am going to do a little shameless plug. So as mentioned, we definitely have a lot of training in confined space that happens all across the province. So these are some upcoming dates we have. We have one November 9th in Dartmouth. November 22nd, we have a confined space course in Yarmouth. November 28th, we have another one here in Dartmouth. And on December 7th, we have another one at our facilities in Dartmouth. So you can go to our website at constructionsafetyns.ca. Right on the homepage, very clearly at the top, it says click here to see our training schedule. You can click right on that and sign up online for any of these courses. And if you are a construction employer, you do get quite a nice discount on those as well. So definitely check that out. Okay, so Paula, we have a couple questions that have popped up here, and for everyone watching, if you have any questions, please enter them in the comments on whatever social platform you're watching us on. So the first one, Paula, someone's wondering, what is the most common question you get from students in your confined space trainings?
Does everybody need training? And yes, they do. Yeah. Because if the attendant doesn't have the training, for example, then he's going to turn, or he or she, apologies there, potentially could all of a sudden go in after the person. So they need to know that. Your emergency personnel need to be trained because it's specific. Do you have SCBAs on your site? Do you have air supplied lines? So it's not only the person that's doing the work, it's the attendant, it's also the rescue personnel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Absolutely. Okay. And then the other question here is around examples. Can you give a little, a few more examples around the confined spaces that, we're seeing in construction?
Tunnels, wells, manholes, cold storage, ship holds, cellars, tanks, culverts, silos, under your house, in your attics. It depends on the situation. So those would be a couple of good ones.
Yeah, that's a lot. So if any employers who are listening, if you encounter any of those types of spaces, definitely reach out to us. We're here to help. Let me throw up here all the different ways that you can contact us. Or as Paula mentioned, of course, you can also reach out to the Department of Labor. So I think that's it. Just a bunch of comments saying, great job, Paula. So you did excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for joining us. Please check out our website for more great resources and stay tuned for more live streams going forward. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.